As someone who lives with his own grief, I also know that what often matters most to the bereaved is that those we have lost are not forgotten.
The officer in charge of the royal vault had reportedly never watched a future king appear without warning. There was no appointment on the books, no advance alert sent through the usual channels, no senior aide leading the way, and no formal paperwork waiting to be processed through the palace machine. It was just Prince William arriving at the entrance of the Windsor Castle Vault on a Tuesday morning, carrying a single document and wearing the kind of expression that made the tone of the visit instantly clear. This was not ceremonial, and it certainly was not routine. It was the execution of a decision that had already been made, and William had come to see it through himself in the most direct and definitive way possible. In his hand was a custodial transfer order that was formally drawn up, legally binding, and signed by William personally, rather than filtered through the usual layers of household administration that would normally handle something of such sensitivity. He had not handed the task to an aide. He had not allowed the paperwork to be managed by staff. He prepared it himself, signed it himself, and drove to Windsor himself because he wanted the record to leave absolutely no room for doubt about who made the call and why. The document named one item only: Diana's sapphire engagement ring. For months, the ring had remained in a carefully maintained state of administrative uncertainty inside protected royal storage. It had not been clearly assigned to William and Catherine's household under formal custodial authority, but it had not been openly available to any other household either. That uncertainty had not happened by accident. It had been allowed to remain in place during what was supposed to be a routine review process, one that turned out to be far more consequential than it first appeared. William had allowed that gray area to stand because he believed the family understanding surrounding Diana's personal belongings was strong enough to prevent anyone from trying to twist it into something else. He believed the agreement over how Diana's possessions would be treated had been communicated clearly enough through the usual household briefing channels that no one would attempt to use a technical administrative opening for purposes it was never meant to serve. According to the information that reached him 48 hours earlier through a documented note from a senior aide, that belief was misplaced. That note reportedly made clear that Camilla's household had submitted a formal request to have Diana's personal collection reclassified under a new institutional category. Such a move would shift oversight away from Diana's direct family line and place it inside the administrative framework of the reigning household. In real terms, that would give Camilla's household operational influence over objects tied most closely to Diana's personal history and legacy. William read the note once, placed it on his desk, and then entered the kind of silence people close to him are said to recognize immediately. It is the stillness he falls into when he has made up his mind and has no intention of being talked out of it before the decision is carried out. By Tuesday morning, the paperwork had been prepared. William picked up the transfer order he had finalized the night before, got in the car, drove to Windsor, and walked into the royal vault without an appointment. What happened next, what the vault officer saw when he reviewed the document, how Camilla reacted when the administrative notice landed on her desk 2 hours later, and what Charles was forced to face when the matter was brought to him all reveal something far bigger than a dispute over a single ring. They speak to Diana's legacy, to the balance of power inside the palace, and to the kind of monarch William appears determined to become. And before going any further, if you're new to Palace Drop, now is the moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel covers the royal family the way events actually unfold, not the polished version packaged for public release. Every video is built around named sources, documented evidence, and the institutional details beneath the headlines. Stay with us, because what William did at Windsor says more about the future of the monarchy than almost anything the palace has formally signaled this year. To understand why William's unannounced arrival carried such extraordinary weight, two things have to be understood at the same time. First, what Diana's sapphire ring truly represents within the family beyond its public symbolism. Second, what the reclassification request really meant in practical terms. Publicly, the story of Diana's sapphire engagement ring is one of the most chronicled object histories in modern royal life. Charles gave it to Diana in 1981 during their engagement, and it famously came from a Gerard catalog rather than being privately commissioned, a detail that stood out even then. Diana wore it throughout a marriage that unraveled in full public view through the late 1980s and the bruising early 1990s. The ring appeared in photographs from some of the most painful chapters of her royal life, including the Panorama interview and the final official engagements before her trip to Paris in August 1997. After Diana's death, the ring became part of her estate and eventually entered the family's protected collection. William has spoken in interviews about wearing it on a cord around his neck for a period after her death. Harry also held it for a time. Then, in October 2010, when William proposed to Catherine in Kenya, he chose Diana's ring deliberately. He later explained that he wanted his mother present in that moment, that he did not want her completely absent from such a major milestone. Since then, Catherine has worn the ring through every major public chapter of their marriage. It appears in photographs from virtually every important royal moment they have shared, and over the past decade and a half it has become one of the most photographed pieces of jewelry in the world. But inside the family, the ring means far more than the public record can fully capture. William has spoken about Diana over the years with an emotional honesty that is rare among senior royals. He has described wanting to keep her memory alive for George, Charlotte, and Louis, and he has made clear in public remarks that he feels a duty to preserve the reality of who she was rather than allowing her story to be swallowed entirely by the palace's preferred version of it. Royal biographer Robert Jobson, drawing on sources close to the Prince of Wales, has reported that William does not see Diana's personal possessions as institutional assets to be folded into the standard royal collection system. He sees them as personal artifacts, carrying the full force of her story, and as things her family should protect and guide. That belief had real implications. It meant William viewed himself not as someone who should simply be consulted out of courtesy, but as the person whose approval was substantively required before any institutional step involving Diana's personal pieces could move forward. That understanding existed within the family and had been passed around through the household briefing process. Those who were part of those discussions reportedly knew exactly what it meant. Morally, it carried weight. Institutionally, however, it had never been locked down in a way that created a hard legal and administrative barrier. That gap, the space between family understanding and formal requirement, was the opening the reclassification request tried to use. Closing that gap was exactly why William went to Windsor. And while you're here, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, whether it's your city or your country. The Palace Drop audience stretches across the world, and we want to know where this community is tuning in from. Stay with us, because the fine print of that reclassification request is the part that completely changes how this story should be understood. The request submitted through Camilla's household asked for Diana's personal collection to be moved into a category known as Crown-Associated Ceremonial Asset. That label sounds technical, but its consequences were huge. In practice, it is a classification reserved for objects managed as part of the monarchy's working institutional machinery, rather than as the personal legacy of one individual family member. Items placed in that category are overseen through the reigning household's collection management office. Decisions about how they are displayed, used at official events, loaned for exhibitions, or ultimately assigned within the family are handled through that office's standard procedures. Those procedures answer to the reigning household, In 2026, that means King Charles's household, with the Queen Consort's household closely aligned and holding significant administrative influence. If Diana's personal collection had been moved into that category, every item in it would have shifted out of the framework that put William's family understanding at the center and into one that Camilla's household could shape directly and on an ongoing basis. This was never just about one ring. It would have permanently altered the structure around the entire collection and forced William to contest decisions one by one through a process that did not formally guarantee him final authority. The sapphire ring may have been the most visible symbol involved, but it was only one part of a much larger archive that includes jewelry, correspondence, clothing, and personal effects, some seen publicly and much of it not. All of it carries emotional and historical weight, both for the people who loved Diana and for a public that, decades later, still feels connected to her. William appears to have understood the full reach of that request almost immediately. The 48 hours that followed were not spent in shock. They were spent preparing a structural answer rather than a temporary one. Simply rejecting the request would have left the door open for a slightly altered version to be submitted later through another channel. He did not want to swat down one attempt. He wanted to make future attempts impossible. The custodial transfer order he prepared on Monday night did more than move the ring. It formally established that Diana's personal collection fell under the custodial authority of William and Catherine's household, and that no administrative body could process any request concerning those objects without William's explicit written approval in advance. What had once been an informal family understanding would now become a permanent institutional requirement recorded in the vault register with full legal force. When William arrived at Windsor, the vault officer reportedly read the document closely before taking any action. Within the hierarchy of the royal vault, a transfer order prepared and signed by the heir to the throne is not treated as a request for consideration. It is an instruction. The officer confirmed that the paperwork was valid, checked the object listed, and reviewed the category into which it was being transferred along with the restrictions now placed on any outside request involving the wider collection. He then retrieved the ring case from protected storage and placed it on the transfer counter. William signed the vault register to confirm receipt. Those familiar with the officer's account say he did so with great deliberation, fully aware that a signature in a register becomes a fact that exists beyond later conversations, shifting loyalties, or palace preferences. After signing, he reportedly held the case for a brief moment without opening it or inspecting the ring. He simply stood there with it in his hands, completely still, in the way those who know him best say he becomes when he is carrying something that is at once deeply personal and profoundly official. Then he placed the case into the document pouch he had brought with him, thanked the officer, and walked back down the corridor he had entered roughly 40 minutes earlier. The transfer was done. The register had been updated. The arrangement William came to create had become part of the monarchy's permanent record. 2 hours later, the palace's routine notification system issued a formal notice confirming that the transfer had been completed. It went through the standard communication channels to all relevant offices, including Camilla's household. The wording was reportedly exact and restrained, the kind of polished palace language designed to make a decision crystal clear while leaving no opening for debate. It confirmed that Diana's sapphire ring had been placed in protected custody under William and Catherine's household. It confirmed that Diana's wider personal collection now fell under William's direct custodial authority, and it confirmed that any future request related to any object in that collection would require William's explicit written approval before any administrative process could even begin. It did not mention the reclassification request that set everything in motion. It did not need to. Anyone who knew the sequence would have understood immediately. If you haven't already, this is exactly the point to subscribe to Palace Drop and hit the bell. This is what the channel does every week. The institutional story beneath the tabloid headline, the named sources, the verified context, and the full picture. You do not want to be discovering this channel months from now and realizing how much you missed. Subscribe now and stay close. Sources familiar with the moment the notice landed on Camilla's desk described her reaction as one of the more quietly significant scenes palace staff had witnessed in years. She reportedly read the document slowly and carefully, making sure she understood every word before deciding what to do next. Then she placed it in the exact center of her desk and asked her private secretary to leave the room. According to that secretary's own account, Camilla then sat alone with the notice for 14 minutes. During that time, she did not call anyone, request further papers, or visibly begin forming a response. When she called the secretary back in, she reportedly gave 4 instructions in order. She said she needed to speak to the king immediately. She wanted the full file on the collection review process that produced the reclassification request. She wanted to know who inside the palace had been informed of the completed transfer before the notice reached her, and she wanted all of that in hand before she spoke to Charles. That final point was the telling one. She wanted to know how many people already understood what had happened before she entered a conversation with her husband where awareness, timing, and control of information would matter. Her household reportedly needed about 90 minutes to gather everything. By then, Charles had already been briefed by his own private secretary. He read the notice, asked 2 questions about the procedural foundation for the transfer, and received confirmation that William had acted within legitimate custodial authority and followed the proper process. After that, Charles reportedly sat alone in his study longer than usual for an administrative matter. By the time Camilla entered carrying the full file, he already had the notification document on the desk in front of him. The conversation that followed is said to have lasted about 50 minutes. Camilla argued that the transfer had taken place without proper consultation with either the king or her household, and that the reclassification request had been a legitimate administrative move submitted through the correct mechanism. She also reportedly maintained that William's answer had gone far beyond the original request and created an institutional barrier that extended well past the single ring named in the transfer order. On that last point, she was absolutely right. That is exactly what it was meant to do. Charles, according to sources, listened without interrupting. When she finished, he told her he would not reverse the transfer, not because he failed to understand her frustration, and not because he wanted to be seen siding against his wife in favor of his son before a staff already aware that something major had occurred. He would not reverse it because the transfer was institutionally valid. William had the standing to make it, had drawn up the documents properly, and had executed the process correctly. Reversing a properly completed decision made by the heir to the throne regarding the personal collection of his late mother was, in Charles's view, something that would carry consequences far beyond this dispute and far beyond the relationships involved. He also reportedly told her something even more consequential. He said he had known about the family understanding surrounding Diana's collection, that he had been present when it was established, and that the understanding had been clear to everyone involved. A request submitted through a collection review process, rather than through the family consultation route that understanding required, he suggested, was at the very least a procedural mistake. And William, he made clear, had every right to answer that mistake in exactly the way he did. Camilla left the study without the reversal she had wanted, and sources say she did not bring the matter back to Charles again. That evening, William reportedly told Catherine everything once they were home. He walked her through the aide's note, the 2 days of preparation, the drive to Windsor, the vault officer's review of the paperwork, the moment he signed the register, and the palace notice that went out afterward. Catherine listened without interrupting, waiting until he had finished before asking a single question. She asked him how he felt. There was, reportedly, a pause before he answered. Then William said he felt as though he had finally done something that should have been done years earlier, and that the fact it took a reclassification request from another household to push him into formal action was something he would be thinking about for a long time. Catherine understood immediately. The family understanding had seemed like enough. Its moral force had seemed strong enough to protect what mattered. The idea that someone might use bureaucracy to sidestep a shared moral agreement had apparently not been something William fully prepared for, even though the way Diana's life was managed by the palace might have suggested he should have been. Catherine told him the transfer was more than a response. It was the arrangement that should always have existed. Diana's collection, she said, should have been protected through formal documented structures from the start rather than resting on the assumption that everyone would choose to honor a private understanding. William agreed. He said that what now sat in the vault register meant their children would never have to face a future in which someone tried to shape Diana's legacy through administrative maneuvering without their express consent. Whatever George, Charlotte, and Louis one day decide regarding their grandmother's possessions would be their decision, not the outcome of a process in which they held no formal voice. Catherine then said that was what Diana would have wanted. William did not answer immediately. Those familiar with the account of that evening describe a long silence before he finally spoke again. When he did, he reportedly said he had gone to Windsor that morning for Diana, and that, according to those sources, was where the conversation ended. The transfer order William filed that Tuesday now sits permanently in the vault register at Windsor Castle. It is part of the institutional record of the British monarchy, and it cannot be undone by later conversations, changing personal dynamics, or shifting administrative tastes, unless William himself gives written consent. That permanence was the point from the very beginning. He was not creating a temporary shield that would need to be defended again and again. He was establishing a hard fact the palace machinery would have to respect no matter who occupied which office in the years ahead. For Camilla, the consequences stretch far beyond the request that triggered the clash. That request appears to have been an attempt to use the distance between moral understanding and legal requirement to gain administrative influence over objects bound up with one of the most emotionally powerful stories in royal history. It failed, and it failed in a way that sealed off the exact opening it had tried to exploit. From now on, any request concerning Diana's collection must go straight to William's household and must carry his explicit written approval before anything can move. There is no longer a loophole between what was understood and what is required. Those familiar with palace dynamics after the transfer say the episode created a quiet but unmistakable change in how senior staff view the boundary between the current reign and the household of the heir. What William did at Windsor crystallized something people around him had been noticing for years. He does not meet institutional pressure with theatrical emotion. He answers it institutionally, with preparation, with the right paperwork, and through the proper channels in a way that turns a challenge into a permanent fact. That is not the behavior of a son acting impulsively from grief. It is the behavior of a future king who understands exactly how power inside an institution works and who has learned how to use it with precision. Diana spent the last decade of her life watching the institution around her manage her story according to its own needs rather than her well-being or wishes. She watched systems and procedures narrow her options, contain her voice, and shape the public narrative around her in ways she could not fully control. Her son walked into a vault on a Tuesday morning and made sure that at least one vital part of her story could never be managed that way again. Not while he lives, not while he holds the authority he does, and not by anyone operating through the palace system. What happened at Windsor goes far beyond one ring, one request, or one document filed on one ordinary morning. It fits into a larger pattern that Palace Drop has been tracking across multiple stories, and that is now becoming visible enough to map clearly in the public record. William is not simply waiting to become king in the ceremonial sense. He is actively shaping the monarchy he will one day inherit before the crown is even his, using every legitimate tool already available to him. From the Duchy of Cornwall's financial reach to his household's administrative power, his constitutional standing as heir, and now the formal custodial authority he has secured over his mother's personal collection. The Duchy decisions already discussed on this channel, the Tom Parker Bowles counterproposal, the scheduling confrontation, the state banquet directive, the patronage reshuffle, and now the vault transfer may each look like isolated responses when viewed one at a time. Together, however, they tell a much bigger story. They point to a future king with a defined vision of the institution he is preparing to inherit, and to a man using every lawful instrument at his disposal right now to start bending that institution toward the shape he believes it should take. Diana sits at the center of that vision in a way that reaches beyond personal sorrow. William has spoken publicly about her instinctive way of connecting with people, about her readiness to engage with causes the palace found difficult, and about the emotional openness she brought to a role long managed through distance and protocol. He has also spoken about wanting his children to understand not just that their grandmother was adored, but why she was adored and what it cost her to be that kind of figure inside a system that often had little room for someone like her. The order William placed in the Windsor Register is one small, but lasting piece of that bigger effort. It ensures that the objects most closely tied to Diana's personal story remain with the people who understand what that story really was, and who want its future handled in a way that reflects who she actually was, not what happens to be convenient for whichever household is most powerful at a given moment. In the grand scale of what it would take to fully protect Diana's legacy, it may seem like one contained act, but it is a permanent one, and inside institutions built to stretch across generations, permanence matters more than temporary wins ever do. So the vault officer filed the completed transfer into the permanent register on a Tuesday morning, and a chapter of Diana's legacy was quietly brought to a close. There was no spectacle, no formal announcement, and none of the public drama that has followed that ring through nearly every other phase of its story. There was only a signature in a register, a case slipped into a document pouch, a future king walking back through a palace corridor toward his car, and a document embedded forever in the monarchy's institutional record stating something plain and irreversible. Diana's collection belongs to her family, and her son made certain of it. Camilla did not get the reversal she wanted. Charles did not step in to undo the transfer, and William went home that evening to have dinner with Catherine and the children in the ordinary way people sometimes do after making a profoundly important move they do not need publicly applauded. Diana spent years watching the institution around her shape her story to suit itself. Her son has now made sure the most personal objects linked to that story cannot be handled that way again by anyone, ever. And if you're not already subscribed to Palace Drop, this is your reminder to hit the bell and stay close. Every week, this channel goes deeper into the stories the palace would rather keep flattened. The palace always has its version. This is the other one. And the story never really ends here, because behind those walls there are always more doors, more files, more decisions unfolding in rooms the public never gets to see. Palace Drop will be there for all of it. Subscribe now, and make sure you're here when the next door opens.